no houses, and barely enough room for my truck to get around the curves. The delivery was supposed to be routine. I was hauling refrigerated medical supplies to a private clinic called Black Ridge Medical Center. The shipment included medication, surgical supplies, and several temperature-sensitive packages. The address looked strange on the paperwork. There wasn't a town listed, just a mountain road, a gate code, and an instruction telling me to use the rear loading dock. I called dispatch before making the turn. "Are you sure this is the right place?" The dispatcher checked the order. "Black Ridge Medical Center? Yeah. That's what I've got. You got me driving a 70-foot truck up a road that looks like it belongs to a logging crew." She laughed. "Just get it there." So I did. The road climbed for another 20 minutes. Then I reached a metal gate. There was a keypad attached to a concrete post. I entered the code for my paperwork. The gate opened immediately. That bothered me more than it should have. Nobody asked for the code. Nobody answered a call. It just opened. I drove through. A few minutes later, the trees opened up, and I saw the clinic. It was a large gray building built directly against the mountain. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. The second thing I noticed was that there were no vehicles. Not one. For a medical clinic that supposedly received regular shipments, that seemed strange. I backed into the loading dock and shut off the engine. I sat there for a moment looking at the building. Then someone knocked on my driver's door. I looked over. A gray-haired man was standing there. He wore a dark jacket and work boots. He looked like he was in his 60s. I rolled my window down. "You the driver?" "Yeah, you're late." I checked the clock. I was early. "I've got you scheduled for 11. He looked at his watch. "You're late." I didn't argue. He held out a clipboard. "Come around back." I climbed down from the cab and followed him. As we walked, I noticed something else. There were no fresh tire marks in the gravel. Mine were the only ones. I asked him where the other employees were. He didn't answer. I asked again. He stopped walking. "Just unload the shipment." There was something about the way he said it that made me leave the question alone. The loading dock opened into a dark hallway. The man turned on a light. It flickered twice before staying on. I started moving the pallets inside. He checked every box. Then he stopped when he reached the refrigerated containers. "Those are the important ones." "I know. Don't leave them outside. I wasn't planning to." He stared at me for a second, then he said, "Good." I finished unloading. He signed the delivery receipt. I glanced at the name. Dr. Elias Voss. I looked at the man. "Dr. Voss?" He nodded. "You work here?" "Sometimes." That answer stuck with me. I didn't know why. I got back into my truck. Before leaving, I called dispatch. The phone rang. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. I started the truck and drove back toward the gate. That's when my phone rang. It was dispatch. I answered. "Hey, did you make the delivery?" "Yeah." "To who?" I told her. There was a long silence. Then she said, "What did he look like?" I described him. She didn't say anything. "What's wrong? Did he tell you his name?" "Elias Voss." Another pause. Then she said something I still think about. "Elias Voss died 4 years ago." I laughed because I honestly thought she was messing with me. She wasn't. "How?" "According to the records, hiking accident." I slowed down. "You're sure?" "I'm looking at the order information right now." I looked through my windshield. The road was empty. "Then who just signed my paperwork?" "I don't know." I asked her to stay on the phone. She told me she was checking the clinic's records. Then she said, "You need to stop the truck." "Why?" "The address you're at isn't active." "What does that mean?" "It means Black Ridge Medical Center closed 4 years ago." I stopped the truck. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I looked toward the mountain. I'm still inside the gate. "Get out of there!" I started driving. The gate appeared ahead of me. It was closed. I stopped. I entered the same code. Nothing happened. I tried again. Nothing. I called dispatch. "I can't get out. Stay in the truck." I looked in the mirror. The clinic was behind me. Every window was dark. Then one light turned on, second floor. I watched it for a few seconds. Another light came on. Then another. Someone was moving through the building. I locked the doors. There's somebody inside. Don't get out. I wasn't planning to. Then I saw a person step onto the second floor landing. It was the same man, Dr. All. Voss. He stood behind the glass and looked directly at my truck. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just watched me. Then he disappeared. The gate suddenly opened. I didn't wait. I drove through it. I didn't slow down until I was several miles down the mountain. My phone lost signal again. The road became narrower. Then I saw something blocking the road. An old white pickup was parked sideways across the lane. I stopped. There was nobody inside. I got out of my cab. I shouldn't have. But I wanted to know if someone was hurt. The driver's door was open. The keys were still in the ignition. There was a Black Ridge Medical Center sticker on the rear window. I heard something behind me. A branch breaking. I heard nothing. I got back into my truck and locked the doors. Then the pickup's engine started. I froze. The truck rolled forward. Nobody was driving it. It crossed the road and disappeared around the bend. I put my truck in gear and followed the opposite direction. A few minutes later, I finally got cell service. My dispatcher called. Police are looking for you. What? They checked the address. I already knew. She continued. The clinic burned down 4 years ago. I looked at the mountain road behind me. Then where was I? She didn't answer. I asked her to explain. She said the original building had been destroyed in a fire. 3 people died. One of them was Dr. Elias Voss. The investigation was closed years ago. I asked why a delivery order would send me there. She said the order had been created through an inactive customer account. I asked who placed it. They couldn't find a name. I pulled over and waited for the police. 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. They searched my trailer first. Everything was there except one small refrigerated container. I told them I had unloaded it at the clinic. They looked at each other. One officer asked what was inside. I told him I didn't know. He asked what the manifest said. I showed him. He read it. Then he looked at me. This wasn't on the original manifest. What? He pointed to the container. It was added after pickup. I stared at the paperwork. I hadn't noticed. The item had been added in handwriting. The description simply said, "Patient, transfer." I asked what that meant. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he asked me whether I'd gone inside the clinic. I told him about the loading dock. He asked if I'd seen a basement. I said no. He looked at his partner. Then he told me something that made the whole situation worse. After the fire, investigators found a basement beneath the clinic. The basement wasn't listed on the original building plans. There was a steel door at the bottom of the stairs. It had been welded shut. From the inside, the officers had never opened it. I asked why. The first officer said they found deep scratches around the door. Human fingernail marks. They also found several hospital wristbands scattered near it. But no bodies, no records. Nothing that explained why they were there. I asked what happened to the patients. The officer said there were no official records showing that those patients had ever been admitted. That was when I remembered something. The man at the loading dock had told me the refrigerated containers were important, not the medication. Not the surgical supplies. The containers. I asked the officer to look at my delivery paperwork again. He did. Then he went quiet. The missing container wasn't listed as medical supplies. It had been classified as a patient transfer. I asked him what that meant. He said he didn't know. Then he asked me to describe exactly where the man had been standing when I unloaded it. I told him. The officer pulled up a map. The old clinic was supposed to have been burned down to the foundation. There shouldn't have been a loading dock. There shouldn't have been a working gate, and there definitely shouldn't have been a man waiting for my truck. But something else bothered me. The road I'd driven down wasn't on the current county map. The police searched for it. They couldn't find it. I thought that meant I'd finally lost my mind. Until they found my tire tracks. They followed them up the mountain. The tracks ended at a burned concrete foundation. There was no clinic, no loading dock, no gate, just the remains of an old building covered in weeds. One officer found something near the foundation, a metal clipboard. My delivery paperwork was still attached to it. My signature was there. So was Dr. Voss's. But underneath both signatures was a sentence written in black ink. "Thank you for bringing them back." I asked the officer what it meant. He didn't know. Neither did I, until several weeks later. My trucking company called me about another delivery request. The destination was Black Ridge Medical Center. Same mountain, same road, same customer account. I told them not to send anyone. They said they hadn't. The order had been canceled before dispatch, but someone had already accepted it, under my driver's name. I hadn't accepted anything. I asked them to send me the paperwork. They did. There was one new line on the manifest. Receiver, Dr. Elias Voss. Underneath it was a handwritten note. This time there were only 4 words. "We still need the driver. I quit the next morning." I haven't driven a mountain route since, but every few months I still check my old email account. The Black Ridge account keeps sending delivery requests. They always disappear before anyone can investigate them. And the strange part isn't that the clinic is gone. It's that the orders always contain the same refrigerated container. The one nobody can explain. The one I delivered that night. Because, according to the inventory records, that container was never empty. It was supposed to contain medical supplies. But when police checked the shipping company's records, they found something different. The container had been registered as empty when it left the warehouse. Whatever I carried into that mountain clinic that night was never supposed to be delivered anywhere. I should have noticed that the motel room didn't have a number. I had been driving for almost 14 hours when I finally decided I couldn't keep going. It was late, somewhere in Oklahoma, and I had another 400 miles before my delivery. Normally I would have parked at a truck stop and slept in the cab, but that night my back was hurting badly enough that I wanted a real bed. I saw a small motel about a mile off the highway. It looked old, but it was open. There were maybe 8 cars in the parking lot. I pulled in, went inside, and asked the woman behind the desk if she had a room. She looked at me for a second before answering. "Yes. How much?" She gave me the price. I paid cash. She handed me a key. There was no room number written on it. I thought that was strange. I asked her where the room was. She pointed toward the hallway. "Last door on the right." I walked down the hallway. There were doors on both sides. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the hallway ended. The last door on the right had no number. I looked back toward the front desk. The woman was watching me. I unlocked the door. The room looked normal. Old bed. Small television. Desk. One window facing the parking lot. I put my bag down and checked the window. The parking lot was mostly empty. My truck was parked directly beneath a light. I took a shower, set my alarm, and lay down. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe an hour. Then I heard someone knock on the door. 3 slow knocks. I opened my eyes. I checked the clock. It was just after 2 in the morning. I waited. Nothing. Then 3 more knocks. I sat up. "Who is it?" No answer. I walked toward the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I opened the door a few inches. Still nothing. I closed it and locked it. Then I heard footsteps. They came from the hallway. Slow, heavy. They stopped outside my room. I waited. The person stood there for several seconds. Then the footsteps continued toward the front desk. I looked through the peephole again. Nothing. I went back to bed. A few minutes later, I heard something that made me sit up again. Someone was walking outside my window. My room was on the ground floor. I pulled the curtain back. A man was standing beside my truck. He had his back toward me. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. I couldn't see his face. I watched him for several seconds. Then he walked around my truck and disappeared behind the trailer. I immediately grabbed my phone. I called the front desk. The woman answered. "Hello? There is someone outside my truck." She went silent. Then she said, "Don't open the door." I asked who he was. She didn't answer. "Do you know him?" she said. "Stay in the room." Then she hung up. That bothered me more than the man outside. I locked the deadbolt. I pushed the desk against the door. Then I turned off the lights. I stayed near the window and watched the parking lot. The man never came back into view. I eventually saw a vehicle leave. I couldn't tell if it was his. I didn't sleep again. At around 6, I heard movement in the hallway. I waited until daylight before leaving. The woman at the front desk looked exhausted. I put the key on the counter. "I'm leaving." She nodded. I asked her about the man. She looked toward the lobby entrance. Then she said, "He shouldn't have been here. Who is he?" "I don't know." That answer didn't convince me. I asked why she'd told me not to open the door. She said she'd seen him before. Doing what? Watching people. I asked whether she'd called the police. She said there wasn't enough evidence. I left. I got into my truck and drove away. For the next several hours, nothing happened. I started convincing myself that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. Maybe the man had been another guest. Maybe he'd been checking his own vehicle. Maybe the woman had been nervous for some unrelated reason. Then I stopped for fuel. While I was standing beside the pump, I noticed a vehicle parked near the edge of the lot. An older, dark sedan. The driver was inside. I couldn't see his face. I ignored it. I finished fueling and walked toward the store. The sedan started. It drove past me slowly. The driver looked over. It was the same man from the motel. I went inside. I didn't follow him. I bought coffee and waited. The sedan disappeared onto the highway. I called my company. I explained what happened. My dispatcher told me to contact police if the vehicle appeared again. I agreed. Then I got back on the road. About an hour later, I saw the sedan behind me. I knew it immediately. It stayed far enough back that I couldn't see the driver clearly. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I took an exit. It took the same exit. I made a right turn at a gas station. It continued straight. I pulled over and waited. The sedan disappeared. I thought I'd lost him. Then I noticed something. There was a different vehicle parked across the street. A white van. It had been following me instead. I didn't know if it was connected. At that point, I was tired enough that I didn't trust my own judgment. I drove to the nearest police station. I parked in front. I went inside and explained everything. An officer came outside with me. He checked my truck. There was nothing. He asked me for the motel's name. I gave it to him. He called the motel. Then he came back. "They say nobody matching your description stayed there." I thought he had misunderstood. "I stayed there last night." He asked for the receipt. I had one. It showed the motel name, the date, and the amount I paid. But there was no room number. The officer looked at it. Then he asked something strange. "Where exactly was your room?" I told him. He called the motel again. This time, the conversation lasted longer. When he hung up, he looked at me. "That room isn't supposed to be rented." I felt a cold feeling in my stomach. "What does that mean?" He said the motel had been operating with several rooms closed because of plumbing problems. The room I stayed in was supposedly one of them. I asked why the woman had given it to me. He didn't know. The officer asked if I wanted to make a report. I said yes. He took my statement. Then he told me to avoid the motel. I left. For the rest of the trip, I didn't see the sedan again. I delivered my load and returned home 2 days later. I forgot about the motel for a while. Then my company received a call. It was from the police department. They were investigating a theft involving several truck drivers. Apparently, someone had been renting rooms at roadside motels near major trucking routes. They would watch drivers arrive, learn their schedules, and sometimes follow them after they left. The police believed the person was looking for trucks carrying expensive cargo. I asked whether the man from the motel had been identified. They said they weren't sure. Then they asked me for the receipt. I sent them a copy. A detective called me afterward. He said the receipt was important. The motel had a record of my payment, but the employee who supposedly rented me the room had no record of working that night. The woman I had spoken to wasn't an employee. She had been using the desk while the actual clerk was asleep in another part of the building. I asked who she was. The detective said they didn't know. There were no cameras inside the motel. The front entrance camera had been disconnected. I asked about the room. The detective told me something I hadn't known. The room had been closed for months. There was no working television, no working phone, and no working bathroom. I remembered taking a shower. I remembered the television being on. I remembered everything. I asked the detective how that was possible. He said he didn't know. Then he asked whether I'd noticed anything unusual inside the room. I thought about it. There had been a small hole in the wall beside the bed. I had assumed it was an old electrical outlet. I told him. There was silence. He asked me to describe it. I did. Then he told me they had found similar holes in other rooms. They weren't electrical outlets. They were viewing holes. Someone had drilled them through the walls. The detective wouldn't tell me what was on the other side. I didn't need him to. The next week, I went back to work. I didn't stay at roadside motels anymore. I slept in my truck. I parked under lights. I locked the doors. I checked underneath the trailer every time I stopped. I thought I had learned my lesson. Then, about 2 months later, I was driving through Arkansas. It was around midnight. I stopped at a busy truck stop. There were at least 20 trucks parked around me. I felt safe. I shut off the engine. Before climbing into the sleeper, I checked my phone. I had one new message. No number, just a photograph. I opened it. It was a picture of me sleeping inside my truck. I stared at the screen. The photograph had been taken from outside my driver's window. I looked around the parking lot. Nothing. Another message arrived. You should lock the passenger door too. I immediately checked it. It was locked. Then I looked toward the passenger window. There was a small piece of paper stuck underneath the windshield wiper. I didn't get out. I called the police. While I waited, I watched the paper move in the wind. An officer eventually arrived. He removed it. There were no fingerprints. The message was short. Same motel. Same room. I had never told anyone which room I'd stayed in. The detective later told me the motel investigation had uncovered something disturbing. The room I'd been given wasn't just being used to watch truck drivers. Someone had been sleeping inside the wall space between that room and the next one. There was a narrow maintenance area behind the drywall. It connected several rooms. The police found blankets, food wrappers, empty bottles, and photographs of guests. Some photographs were years old. The person had apparently been living inside the building without being noticed. They never found him. The motel closed shortly afterward. I still think about that room sometimes, especially the first night. Because I remember lying in that bed after my shower. I remember hearing the television playing quietly. I remember looking at the door and thinking I was finally alone. But when the police examined the room later, they found something underneath the bed. A small flashlight. It had been turned on and placed facing the wall. The battery was almost dead, and beside it was a photograph. It showed me sleeping. The photograph had been taken from inside the room, from somewhere I couldn't see. On the back, someone had written, "You were awake longer than the others." I don't know what happened to the person who took it. I don't know whether the woman at the desk was working alone. And I don't know how long someone had been watching that room before I arrived. But I do know one thing. I never sleep in a motel room with an unnumbered door anymore. And if I ever walk into a room and notice a hole in the wall beside the bed, I leave immediately. The first time I saw the man, he was standing in the middle of the highway waving his arms at me. I almost hit him. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was hauling a load of frozen food through a rural stretch of Missouri. There were no houses nearby. No businesses. No street lights. Just a 2-lane highway cutting through farmland. I saw the man about half a mile ahead. At first, I thought he was a police officer. Then I saw he wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing jeans, a dark jacket, and a baseball cap. He was standing directly in my lane. I slowed down. When I got close enough to see his face, he started waving both arms. I stopped about 20 feet away. He ran toward my driver's door. Don't stop here. I kept the window closed. What happened? There's a wreck ahead. I looked past him. The road was dark. I couldn't see any emergency lights. He came closer to the window. There's another truck stopped around the bend. Where's the driver? I don't know. He looked behind him. Then back at me. Just keep going. I didn't like the way he said it. If there's a wreck, I need to call somebody. There's no service. He was right about that. I checked my phone. No signal. He pointed behind me. You can get service farther down. I didn't move. He stepped closer. Please. That word changed the way I felt about the situation. He didn't sound like someone trying to rob me. He sounded scared. I asked him where his truck was. He pointed toward the shoulder. There was a pickup about 100 yards behind him. Hazard lights flashing. I could barely see it. Is that yours? He nodded. Get in. He shook his head. I can't. Why? He looked at the dark road ahead. Because they're still there. I didn't know who he meant. I reached for my radio. He immediately said, Don't. I looked at him. Why? They can hear it. That was the moment I decided to leave. I put the truck in gear. He stepped away from the cab. I drove around him. As I passed, he shouted something. I couldn't understand it. I kept going. For the next several miles, I expected to see a wreck. I didn't. No broken vehicles. No debris. No emergency lights. Nothing. I started thinking I'd made a mistake. Maybe the man had been drinking. Maybe he'd been involved in an accident somewhere else. Maybe he was simply scared and confused. Then I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder ahead, a large tractor trailer. Hazard lights flashing. I slowed down. There was no driver inside. The cab door was open. I pulled onto the shoulder. I called 911. Still no service. I got out and approached the truck. There was damage along the passenger side. Not severe. Just enough to suggest it had been sideswiped. I looked inside the cab. The driver's seat was empty. There was blood on the steering wheel. Not much. Just a small smear. I immediately stepped back. Then I heard something from behind my truck. A car door closing. I turned. The man I'd seen earlier was standing about 50 feet away. He wasn't running anymore. He was just watching me. I got back into my truck and locked the doors. He walked toward me. I started the engine. He raised both hands. Wait, I didn't open the window. He pointed at the damaged truck. You see? What? He pointed toward the trailer. The driver wasn't in there. I know. He was underneath. I looked at the ground. I couldn't see anything. The man shook his head. Don't get out. I asked why. He looked toward the trees. Because they're waiting for someone to stop. I asked who. He didn't answer. Instead, he ran back toward his pickup. I watched him get inside. The pickup drove away. I didn't follow. I drove to the nearest place where I could get a signal. A sheriff's deputy met me there. I explained what happened. He asked for the location. I gave it. He drove out there. About an hour later, he called me. The damaged truck had been abandoned. There was blood inside. But no driver, no footprints. No sign of an accident victim. The deputy asked me whether I'd seen anyone else. I told him about the man. He asked what he looked like. I described him. Then the deputy went quiet. He asked me whether the man had been driving a pickup. I said yes. What color? I told him. The deputy said there was no pickup registered at the scene. I thought maybe it had already left. He said the road had only one entrance and one exit. No other vehicles had passed through during the relevant period. According to the traffic camera at the nearest intersection, I was the only truck on that section of road. I didn't know what to make of that. The deputy said they'd keep looking. I continued my route the next morning. I didn't hear anything else for several days. Then I got a call from my company. The damaged truck belonged to a driver named Mark. He had been missing for 2 days. His company had reported him missing the same morning I'd seen the truck. I asked if they knew what happened. They didn't. The police eventually found his trailer. They never found him. That should have been the end of it. But 3 weeks later, I was driving the same route. I didn't want to. My dispatcher offered me a different run. I accepted it. Unfortunately, the route was changed because of weather. I ended up on the same highway. It was daytime. Traffic was heavier. I told myself that made it different. Then I saw the pickup, same color, same shape, parked at a farm entrance. I slowed down. There was nobody inside. I drove past. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Nobody spoke. I said hello. Silence. Then a man's voice said, "You shouldn't have stopped." I recognized him. It was the man from the highway. I hung up. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. It rang a third time, then stopped. I called the police. They told me to continue to a public location. I did. When I reached the next town, I pulled into a busy gas station. I checked the mirrors. The pickup wasn't there. I started feeling stupid again. Then I noticed something under my windshield wiper. A folded piece of paper. I didn't touch it. I called the police. An officer arrived and removed it with gloves. He opened it. There was one sentence. "You were supposed to keep driving." The officer looked at me. "Did you know the missing driver?" "No." "Did he know you?" "No." The officer took the note. Then he asked me about the phone call. I told him. They traced the number. It was a prepaid phone. It had been activated 2 days earlier. The phone was found in a trash can near the gas station. There was no usable fingerprint. I stopped taking that route. Months passed. Then the police called me. They had found Mark. He was alive. He had been staying in another state under a different name. They couldn't explain why he abandoned his truck, but they learned something from his phone records. He had called the same prepaid number that had called me. I asked what he told them. They wouldn't say. But the detective did tell me something else. The man I'd seen on the highway wasn't Mark. They had a photograph of him from a gas station camera. He was standing beside Mark's truck the night before Mark disappeared. The police couldn't identify him. I asked what he wanted. The detective said they didn't know. Then he asked me a question. "When you first saw that man, did he tell you not to stop?" "Yes." The detective paused. "That's what he told Mark too." I didn't understand. He explained that Mark had told a friend about a man standing in the highway. Mark had stopped. The man told him not to stop. Mark ignored him. Then something happened that Mark never fully explained. He abandoned his truck. He disappeared. And 3 weeks later, I saw the same man. I asked the detective whether they thought the man was responsible. He said they had no evidence. That was the official answer. I still drive long haul. I still stop when I see someone in trouble. But I don't stop on empty roads anymore. If I see someone standing in the middle of a highway at night, I call for help from somewhere safe. I don't get out. I don't approach. And I definitely don't let a stranger convince me that the safest thing to do is stop. Because the last thing the detective told me before hanging up was something I still can't explain. They had searched the area where I first saw the man. There were no footprints. Not mine. Not his. Not from the pickup. Nothing. The only tracks they found belonged to my truck, and the damaged truck. The man had apparently been standing in the middle of the road, but there was no evidence that he had ever been there at all. A few months ago, I was driving through Missouri again. Different highway. Different truck. It was just before sunrise. I saw a man standing on the shoulder ahead. He was waving at passing cars. I didn't stop. I kept driving. As I passed him, I looked in my mirror. He was still standing there. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It stopped. A few seconds later, a message appeared. "You finally learned." I deleted it. I haven't received another message since. But I still think about that first night, especially the question I never asked him. If he knew someone was waiting around the bend, why was he standing alone in the middle of the highway? And if he was trying to warn me, who was he warning me about?